As someone who studied authoritarianism in grad school, I was eager to see how Disney's Wish would portray a so-called benevolent dictator and the revolution that overthrows his regime. There were a lot of exciting opportunities, with Magnifico being not just your average dictator, but a magical one. The concept of a dictator taking the wishes of his people for their own good, or even simply because he knows better, or thinks he does, is a fantastic angle that aligns greatly with the historical and modern autocrats we have seen. Granted, Magnifico is a king, not a dictator, but to me the dialogue and plot, containing a revolution against a ruler who yells that he decides what everyone deserves, as well as the timing of the movie's release, made the thematic intention clear. But Disney's newest depiction of dictatorship doesn't supply the nuance needed to showcase authoritarianism or totalitarianism for the realities and consequences. Authoritarianism is not just a dictator and its cronies. Authoritarianism can have democratic traits, and democracies can have authoritarian traits. This means the scale of authoritarianism isn't necessarily dictatorship on one end and democracy on the other. For a Disney film, it's likely more effective and acceptable to show a dictatorship in its most obvious form, invading, oppressive, and intimidating, to add a simple political aspect to the villain's villainy and give a clear goal to the hero. Considering Disney's track record of confronting tough personal and political topics, I think they really missed the mark here. An often cited quote from director Brad Bird is that animation is not a genre, it's a medium. Among everything else that which could have been story-wise, it also could have been a great medium for showcasing how authoritarianism actually works. Political scientist Juan Jose Lentz described authoritarianism with 4 qualities which can be seen in Wish. First, limited political pluralism, realized with constraints on the legislature, political parties, and interest groups. Magnifico is the sole ruler of Rosas, criticized by Asha as a self-authorized grantor of the city's wishes. There is no democracy in the decision-making of whose wish is granted. Magnifico declares that he decides what everyone deserves. Lentz also mentions that this limited plurality causes a tendency towards political apathy of most citizens and the toleration or encouragement of such apathy. There is evidence that people become apathetic after the submission of their wishes to the king, as shown with Simon, who loses a bit of his personality after doing so. But this isn't persistent. The people of Rosas are shown as generally happy, instead of feeling as though a part of them is missing, or being afraid to challenge the king for a better life. Second, political legitimacy based upon appeals to emotion and identification of the regime as a necessary evil to combat disorder. Magnifico founded Rosas to give people a safe place where their dreams couldn't be crushed by the cruelty of the real world, a very solid fear that he uses to justify his control over the people's wishes. But there is no necessary evil here. The people love Magnifico, and Magnifico doesn't resort to terror to keep the people in line until the very end. Furthermore, the government of Rosas just has Magnifico at the top. There is no inner circle or bureaucracy to do Magnifico's dirty work or be blamed for dysfunction. This is one of the reasons why Magnifico is overthrown so quickly. All dissatisfaction is aimed directly at him because he is seen as solely responsible. In the Soviet Union, those who suffered under the repressive policies administered by Stalin's officers believed things would get better if only Stalin knew. Zheng Chang, the co-author of Mao, The Untold Story, spoke of her life in Mao's China. I blame people around Mao. I blame Madame Mao, but I could never contemplate Mao. Third, minimal political mobilization and suppression of anti-regime activities. Magnifico fears uprisings. He says this directly when he dismisses granting Asha's grandfather's wish because it might inspire a revolution, and he is immediately afraid of the presence of the star, which threatens his power as the sole magic user in the kingdom. But there is hardly any repression in the kingdom of Rosas. Asha's challenge to the king isn't punished, and we never see any real consequences for breaking the laws that the grumpy character fears. Without a sufficient balance of fear and apathy, it becomes easy for Asha to start the revolution against him, and for the people of Rosas to join her. Finally, formally ill-defined executive power is often vague and shifting, which extends the power of the executive. Magnifico's rule starts out with him holding the power in Rosas and a fair amount of freedom permitted to the people. The opening song seems to suggest that life in Rosas is pretty good, with the wish granting being a bonus to this rent-free, diverse utopia. And giving the wishes isn't even a requirement to stay there. As Magnifico emphasizes, the people of Rosas are encouraged to give their wishes to him willingly. The only crime you can really commit in Rosas is practicing magic. The only law is that nobody is allowed to grant wishes except for Magnifico. The fact that the grumpy character recites it so fluidly suggests the people of Rosas have been taught this since birth or arrival. But other than that, it appears that the people of Rosas are allowed to do whatever they wish, as long as it doesn't challenge Magnifico's power. This exchange of one's hopes and dreams for security and stability is a brilliant metaphor for authoritarianism, the escape from freedom highlighted in social psychologist Erich Fromm's work. But Wish ignores the role of the people in authoritarianism, bureaucrats, soldiers, and citizens. Instead, Magnifico himself is seen as the problem, a consequence of his kingdom's poor political structure. Wish depicts Rosa's descent into totalitarianism as a consequence of the king's madness. Furthermore, this madness is removed from Magnifico's own autonomy. It is not him who consciously decides to oppress his people, but a magical evil book that strengthens his desire to seek more power. The road to this madness is justified by his frustrations with the ungratefulness of the people of Rosas, and his openness to repression is explicitly shown through his stomping on figurines representing the people during the final moments of This Is the Thanks I Get. But it's the book of forbidden magic that sends him beyond saving, cackling into a green-eyed sadism fueled by his people's crushed wishes. Magnifico's character, intentionally or not, ignores the rationality that produces totalitarianism in favor of a magical evil madness unable to hold anyone accountable. At the same time, it is his madness that corrupts the perfection and innocence of Rosas. It is his removal that is the one and only solution. But aren't all dictators inherently paranoid and to some degree insane? In 1990, political psychologist Dr. Gerald Post actually warned U.S. policymakers against portraying Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein as a bad man. Dr. Post wrote that this could mislead decision-makers and emphasize that Saddam was dangerous but not psychotic. Saddam's rationalities, according to Post, were based in malignant narcissism and Ba'athist ideals, but he was not beyond the realm of sanity. Similar debates over the mental states of infamous dictators have questioned the depictions of such leaders as insane. When we attribute their terror to madness or insanity, we remove the twisted rationalities of their decision-making. Rational does not mean right. It only defies how people reach decisions and ideas. We use madness because it is often the only word to describe the horrors these regimes create. Very often, this madness is achieved through the normalization of more and more radical standards. In The Origins of Totalitarianism, Hannah Arendt notes the liberal rationalizations that lead to totalitarianism. In each one of us there lurks such a liberal, wheedling us with the voice of common sense. The road to totalitarian domination leads through many intermediate stages for which we can find numerous analogies and precedents. The frog in a boiling pot is often used to embody this transformation of a society, ending with most people looking up and questioning, how did we get here? Instead, in Wish, over the course of 2 days, the peaceful utopia becomes a dystopian nightmare due to the frustrations of one man. The problem with totalitarian Rosas being the result of a singular bout of one man's madness is that it ignores the participation of the masses required for totalitarianism to occur. To go back to Arendt, totalitarian movements are possible wherever there are masses who, for one reason or another, have acquired the appetite for political organization. Furthermore, these regimes inspire people to become willing fodder for the machine of repression. It may be understandable that a Nazi or Bolshevik will not be shaken in his conviction by crimes against people who do not belong to the movement or even hostile to it. But the amazing fact is that neither is he likely to waver when the monster begins to devour its own children, and not even if he becomes the victim of persecution himself. He may even be willing to help in his own prosecution and frame his own death sentence if only his status as a member of the movement is not touched. Wish ignores this terrifying aspect of the mass psychology of totalitarianism in favor of a climax that makes no sense politically or structurally. Magnifico's totalitarian control at the end of the film only takes a day. While Lentz acknowledges that authoritarian systems could be precursors to totalitarianism, he also states that truly totalitarian regimes cannot be built so quickly. Magnifico's control of Rosas at the end of the film, to truly represent a totalitarian regime, would certainly take more than a day to build, and more than just him to succeed. This is also why Magnifico is overthrown so quickly. Instead of allowing intermediate stages that make the people of Rosas used to his increasing power and less likely to resist it, he goes from 0 to 100, forcing an immediate revolution. In knowing what we know now, the 17s and Queen Amaya aimed the revolution towards Magnifico and his obsession with power. It's not illogical for a revolution to direct their grievances against a leader, but merely replacing a dictator will not solve all of a country's problems, as the movie implies. In this current version of Wish, the systemic remnants of the dictatorship, even if they are not immediately acknowledged or resolved, will certainly come up again later. What happens to Magnifico's guards, who were paid by their leader? People who had their wishes granted already and are eternally grateful to Magnifico. People who had impossible wishes that only magic could make come true. In a few years, but likely even less than that since the revelation and revolution occurred in just 2 days, there would be people fighting to release Magnifico or cursing the revolt that took him away. In real life, there often remains nostalgia for dictatorships years after they've collapsed. The same would certainly happen in Rosas. Beyond the removal of Magnifico, there still remains the question of why Amaya is immediately accepted as the new ruler. The people of Rosas question Magnifico. Wouldn't they demand to know what she knew? How did the people of Rosas know that Amaya didn't send Magnifico to the dungeon so she could find a way to get him out of the mirror later? How do they know she doesn't know how to use her husband's magic? How do they know she won't seek revenge against them? Wives of dictators are rarely left unscathed after the overthrow or death of their husbands. Zhang Qing, also known as Madame Mao, the wife of Mao Zedong, was arrested a month after the death of her husband in 1976 and convicted of counter-revolutionary crimes. Imelda Marcos, with her infamous collection of shoes, is criticized for fueling her obsession with the hard work of the Filipino people that she and her husband stole from. Even when a wife dies before her dictator husband, there is still a push for accountability. The legacy of Eva Perón, though she is still celebrated for her short life and humanitarianism, is still contested because of her husband's crimes against the people of Argentina. The execution of the Ceausescus in Romania after the 1989 revolution speaks for itself. Amaya was initially supposed to be part of a villainous couple with Magnifico. Her nonsensical innocence after the fall of her husband is a story mistake that removes any intelligence from the people of Rosas and any opportunity for historical reference and appreciation. The problem with the real-life application of the story is the idea that a society can be improved as soon as a leader is removed from power. As history has shown, toppling one leader does not immediately equal peace and stability. Very often it promises the opposite. And another version where the people of Rosas are not just wide-eyed, open-handed beggars of their king, but accomplices to their leader's crimes and the desire to have their wishes come true. This could have been a great opportunity to have the characters really look at each other and themselves. Instead, Magnifico is the problem, and the kind-hearted Amaya is the solution, despite what history and common sense would say. Imagine a revised version of Wish where Magnifico and Amaya allow people to have housing, food, and safety for free, but require every person to give up their wishes in exchange. All who refuse would be questioned for not wanting to give their loyalty to Magnifico or being ungrateful for his benevolence. Speaking or acting against a couple would be severely punished by a special force, but justified by their need for security. Magnifico and Amaya could establish a bureaucracy that interacts with the people in order to insulate themselves from criticism. There could be an elite group of wish collectors, similar to apprentices, who are trained in a bit of magic in order to gather the wishes of the people and deliver them to the king for a chance to be granted. This is one way Magnifico could have displaced the blame from himself from the beginning. Every time a wish wasn't granted, people could take their anger out on the elite for not advocating for their wish, but never Magnifico. And if he wanted to boost his image, he could fire that elite, or grant a wish, and restore his appearance of benevolence. There could be an increased chance of getting a wish granted if you report traitorous behavior or serve the kingdom. Not only would Rosas be a surveillance state, but it would be a country where people turn on each other to increase their likelihood of having their wishes granted. Asha's realization should have been the truth, that the just and righteous Magnifico is at the center of Rosas' corruption, turning the people against each other. The movie attempts this with the character of Simon, who betrays his friends to have his wish granted. For this, Simon is the most interesting character in Wish, one who should have embodied the price of authoritarianism, the automaton in Fromm's Escape from Freedom, who loses his self and at the same time consciously conceives himself as free and subject only to himself. Simon even admits that he betrayed his friends because he didn't know how to live without all of him. Simon gives up his friends willingly to have his wish granted by Magnifico, and as a result becomes a brainwashed weapon used against Asha. The best part of this scene is the way the crowd gasps, and then cheers after he is corrupted by Magnifico's magic, a startling new stage of reality justified by the rational necessity of their security. Imagine a version of Wish where the turn to totalitarianism was accomplished in more intermediate stages, justified by fear and the desire for safety. Magnifico commands his guards to search people's houses for the star. People comply because it is necessary. Magnifico requires people to put paintings of himself on their walls, which magically watch and listen to them in their living rooms. A little weird, but he is doing it for their protection. Magnifico learns that crushing the wishes gives him more power, but also kills the wish giver. He censors any discussions of sudden deaths in the kingdom, or blames them on Asha. The political threat of the star requires more wishes to be crushed, giving Magnifico more power at the cost of his people. And yet, even when the truth is out, people still fight to prove their loyalty to Magnifico by giving him their wishes. In the end, they see what has been accomplished by giving one man so much power. And even then, there are still those among them who believe all of this is necessary to keep Rosas and their wishes safe. When we separate ourselves from history and our worst monsters from their humanity, or apparent madness from rationality, we ignore or even overlook how authoritarianism and totalitarianism become gradually normalized. Instead of recognizing when we become part of the problem, we place the blame on the leader and believe that once he or she is removed, everything will go back to normal. To quote Masha Gessen's Surviving Autocracy, we learn to think of history as something that has already happened to other people. The Holocaust or the Gulag are such monstrous events that the very idea of rendering them in any sort of grayscale seems monstrous too. In crafting the story of something that should never have been allowed to happen, we forge the story of something that could not possibly have happened, or something that cannot happen here. At the end of the film, the imprisonment of Magnifico in a mirror magically solves all of the kingdom's problems. The people decide to work together to help their dreams come true, instead of relying on a magical man to give their lives meaning. And somehow the replacement of Magnifico with another autocratic leader, who was married to the former dictator and surely was complicit in his crimes against the people, is seen as the solution. There is some alluded sharing of power with the newly installed fairy godmother role that is granted to Asha. But even when someone is democratically elected, simply voting them out may not fix ongoing political, cultural, or economic issues. In a situation where a leader is overthrown, such as Magnifico, these issues wouldn't simply go away. In fact, it might even worsen. I am positive that Magnifico's influence doesn't end there, and in a more nuanced film, his fall would certainly have a much greater and devastating reaction than Magnifico Schmagnifico. Magnifico and the people of Rosas could have been a layered representation of authoritarianism, totalitarianism, and their deep, lasting consequences. He could have been overthrown by a national reckoning of the people's complicity within the system, of those who became monsters in order to increase the chances of having their dreams come true. No, the ending may not have been pretty, but in an ending similar to Encanto, it would be clear that the people could be willing to rebuild for a better future. Asha's realization should have been that no good wish is worth the betrayal of oneself or one's people. Her wish should have been to break the spell of self-sabotage upon the people of Rosas. As long as we believe authoritarianism is the fault of one person and his madness, a problem that solves itself as soon as that person dies or is replaced or overthrown, it will be harder to recognize and repair its true impact. This isn't to say that all authoritarian regimes are solely the fault of the people, but not even a magical dictator can rule on his own, nor can he be defeated by wishes alone.